Hey guys, how's it going? Value Venture Investing here today. So today we're going to be talking about Apple. Apple's Q3 2022. Now, very kind of interesting results. We're kind of in an interesting time right now. We got rampant inflation because of all the money printing that was going on, about 9.1% in the US right now. Because of that, the Fed, they're really tightening their policy. Rates are going up. We just had another 75 basis point raise. We got the war going on in Russia. So all these things got, as you guys are aware, I haven't talked about this much lately at all, got investors really worried. So this Apple earnings report was a very interesting one, and very important for the market as a whole. After the report here, taking a look at the stock as of recording this, it's up about 4%, but it's been kind of up, down, all over the place. It's a mixed bag, but in general, it's a really good earnings report as far as I'm concerned. So this video, we're going to go through this. We're going to go through their financials. I'm going to tell you if I'm still holding, what my thoughts are going forward. So top line here, revenue. This was pretty interesting considering everything that's going on right now. Like I said, even just Russia, when you think about that, that's a huge component, billions of dollars that Apple's losing, pulling out. Whether that's a smart thing to do or not, that's for another video. But still, they had $83 billion this quarter, and that was versus an estimate of 82.76. EPS was $1.20 versus an estimate of $1.16. So some pretty solid beats on the top line here in the EPS as well. Cash has dropped to about $179.3 billion, but of course, they're trying to be net cash neutral. Over time, they actually mentioned again on the conference call that they think their stock is really undervalued. So that's why this is going to continue to drop, but still a huge amount of money that they have, but they also have a huge amount of debt out now too, trying to make that neutral over time. Now, talking about the different segments, this is where it gets a little interesting. So the most important one, it's still an iPhone company. iPhone revenue was $40.67 billion, and the estimate was actually $38.85. It's a pretty huge beat there. And this, of course, was June quarter record as well. And you even think about one thing I didn't mention either was the lockdowns in China. This is still huge that they're doing this good, and I think this is why the stock was responding quite positively, even though we had misses in these categories. iPad revenue, $7.22 billion versus an estimate of $6.93. But of course, all of these were affected by significant supply chain constraints. Specifically, they're talking about Mac, $7.38 billion versus an estimate of $8.45 billion. Pretty huge miss there, especially considering how incredibly powerful and competitive these Macs are getting. But they specifically said they couldn't really test the demand for these because they just didn't have the supply. So this supply constraint thing is still a story going forward here. And these aren't necessarily misses because the demand isn't there because of the recession. Today we just actually in the US officially went into a recession, 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. Not because of that yet, but because of supply constraints. Services, again, the one that I'm always like, wow, it's almost $20 billion, 19.6, but still the estimate was 19.75 billion, so a slight miss there, but still these numbers are amazing. Wearables, home and accessories, 8.08 billion versus 8.82 billion, so again, a miss there. Still, these things are growing. Services, I believe, is growing. This is an all-time record for services as well, even though analysts expected a little bit more. So, all in all, I think it was phenomenal in terms of these numbers, considering what's going on right now, right? So let's take a quick look at their financials, and then I'm going to go over a couple things that were on their earnings call. So taking a look at their income statement here, again, net sales were $82.9 billion. And if you compare that to a year ago, it was 81.43. So again, there is our about 2% increase year over year, even though what's going on right now, that's pretty impressive. Gross margin was actually up slightly compared to a year ago. And again, I always like to talk about the research and development here. That's a pretty huge increase, almost 6.8 billion versus 5.7 billion a year ago quarter. So that's really got me hopeful on all these products they're talking about that's going to come out. So we'll see on that. And of course, net income was down slightly from a year ago. But again, like I said, R&D right there is more than $1 billion. So I'm more than okay with that. And everything else seems to be pretty much in line. But yeah, to see that as long as there's products that are going to be coming out of that, yeah, that's pretty interesting. EPS, of course, we went through this as well. Diluted was $1.20 versus $1.30 a year ago. Net sales by reportable segment, it's up in the Americas, it's up in Europe. Greater China, of course, they were locked down, so that makes sense. It's slightly down. Japan is down quite a bit as well, and the rest of Asia Pacific is actually up. So that whole mix there equates to total net sales of almost $83 billion. That, of course, like we spoke about up top, are up year over year. Net sales by category, the iPhone was up 40.6 billion versus 39.5 billion. Mac, like we said, was down. iPad was actually down slightly. Wearables, home and accessory was down. And services, of course, was way up from a year ago because, of course, that growth has been incredible. But again, guys, a lot of this is supply constraint issues, but obviously something to keep in mind. Looking at their income statement here, again, remember, cash equivalents, and marketable securities, short and long term, include that cash. That's about $180 billion. In terms of their liabilities and equity, nothing really interesting there. Taking a look at their cash flow statement, again, nothing too interesting. Purchases of marketable securities I found were a little bit interesting here because they're down significantly from last quarter. So potentially maybe, I'm just looking into this, thinking about it. I'm always kind of wondering what this means for the broader economy. Does that mean they don't think it's a good time to buy the last 3 months? Who knows? Repurchase of common stocks, again, was $64.9 billion. So that's part of that capital return program. Of course, the cash and cash equivalents at the end of the period was $28.8 billion, down from $35.2 at that time a year ago. And of course, we know that they're trying to get to a net cash neutral position. So one of the big things this quarter, I think, that's driven this stock up is this better than expected supply constraints. If you watched my last video, they were warning, and these earnings kind of came in at the lower end, just a bit below that. So much better than they thought. And this shows how Apple is always very conservative with their earning estimates when they do give them. Of course, like we said, the May and June, these were quarter records in many of these segments. And again, like I said, they're always conservative, so this was a really good thing to hear. Of course, they give no guidance. They talk about that all the time because they don't know what's going on right now. But in terms of their products and the supply constraints, they expect this to be going better in the future, specifically with services. So they expect revenue to accelerate next quarter. So that's something that we actually haven't kind of heard in a while. So it's some really good news in terms of Apple. So all in all, it was a good quarter, especially considering what's going on right now in the world. Going forward, again, like I said, we're obviously in a recession right now, and I think stocks could fall quite a bit. It's quite potential. I'm a long-term investor. This channel is kind of aimed towards long-term investing. Get through all the short-term stuff, so I'm not that worried about it. But yeah, I mean, we've kind of been seeing the market rally a little bit here lately because some earnings weren't as bad as we thought, but I think we're just kind of in the midst of this. We still got a ways to go. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with inflation. That's the big thing. And it'll be very interesting to see next quarter what the earnings are like if we actually see this acceleration of revenue. So I'd love to know what you guys think. I'd love to know what you're doing with your stocks. If you're still holding Apple, what you think of this quarter, or what you think of the market as a whole, or the economy, or how bad things might potentially get. So that's going to be it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.